Hello everybody, welcome to theme 15 of Geochemistry and Society. This is a series of sessions throughout the week focusing on core topics of interest to all delegates across the disciplines, with an emphasis on issues relevant to society, but especially encompassing teaching and communication. Firstly, we'd like to give our sincere thanks to Adina Payton, for organising this session, and also to all our panel. Adina, of course, is with us. I hope you can all see her. Adina gives a wave. Yep. And the rest of the panel you can see as well. We'll get them to introduce themselves in a moment. We'd also like to thank Kevin Johnson at the Geochemical Society, who's listening in. So be careful. You might not see him, but he's listening in. And Jackie and the organisers at White Iron for putting this together so quickly in such difficult circumstances. Now, we're your hosts. There are two hosts. I'm Tom Parkhill. I'm the press officer for the Goldschmidt Conference, and I'm going to hand over to Barb. Barb?
Hi, and I'm Barb Dutrow. I'm a professor at Louisiana State University, and I've taught a course on scientific visualization and communication for about the last 20 years. So this is a topic close to my heart. Our final session for theme 15 is teaching and communicating in the age of social media. And this session culminates a series of excellent panel discussions throughout this week, nearly all of which have embedded aspects of communication. So our session discusses strategies and concepts which underlie effective and much needed communication across the geosciences, from current events to educating our next generation of geoscientists. We hope you've all had an opportunity to view the illuminating presentations in this session by our panelists, Jennifer Glass, Nicole Krause, Adina Payton, and Carly Wiener. And we also welcome to this distinguished group an additional panelist, Dr. Kim Cobb, a climate scientist and the Georgia Power Chair and Advanced Professor from Georgia Tech. So our discussion will be about teaching and communicating in the geosciences, what we aim for, what we need to do, how we do it, and what's achievable, where we go right and where we go wrong, and how the dramatic circumstances of our period will invite or even force us to change how we do things. Tom, back to you.
I'm trying to get my webcam on. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so a few housekeeping things before we begin. Audience members can type a question into the question box of the GoToMeeting control panel. So if you want to ask anything, please do. We'd be very happy to hear from you. Or you can raise your hand. One of us will be monitoring. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking, but don't forget to unmute. Because we have a maximum of 6 cameras which can be shown at once, only one of the hosts will be seen, which is why Barbara and I are switching back and forward. Now I'm going to switch myself off again, and Barb, welcome back.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Tom. So we'll begin by asking the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and their topics and tell us about their areas of expertise. So let's begin with Kim and then go on to Jennifer, Nicole, Adina, and Carly. Kim.
Thank you so much. So my name is Kim Cobb. I'm a professor of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at Georgia Tech. I'm also the director of our Global Change program at Georgia Tech, which is a program focused on climate solutions across the education and research space. And I also do a very large amount of communicating about climate science and climate change and our choices on Twitter, where you can find me at Corals and Caves. And I'm very excited to have learned so much from my fellow panelists this evening through their astute talks and our conversations earlier today, and also really look forward to interacting with you about what you care about in this space and how we can all learn together and be more effective at communicating through the research, teaching, and public engagement spheres. Thanks a lot for having me.
Hi, I'm Jen Glass, and I'm very lucky to be in the same unit as Dr. Cobb and have learned a lot from her. So I'm associate professor in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at Georgia Tech. I study kind of interactions between major and minor biogeochemical cycles and implications for astrobiology. And the topic of my talk here was about Twitter and how we can use Twitter to democratize and diversify geosciences and geochemistry. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Nicole?
Hi, I'm Nicole Kraus. I go by Nikki, so if anyone calls me that, that's also fine. I'm a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Life Sciences Communication Department there, and I'm also a researcher in that department's research group, which is called Science, Media, and the Public. And most of the research we do looks at public perceptions of controversial science, including the question of how and why science becomes controversial in the first place. We do a lot of work with human gene editing, most recently with artificial intelligence, genetically modified organisms, and other topics to understand why publics may resist some of the best available scientific evidence in some of these areas. So thank you for having me, and I'm excited for the panel discussion.
Pleasure. Thank you. Adina.
Hi, my name is Adina Paitan. I'm a biogeochemist at the University of California in Santa Cruz, and I use isotopes to study Earth processes and interactions. But I'm also very passionate about making our science relevant to the general public and the community, and making sure that we are effective in our teaching and communication and outreach. So I devote a lot of time to these aspects and manage lots of wide array of various programs that relate to communication and professional development.
Thank you, Adina. Carly.
Hi, thank you again for having me on this distinguished panel. It's so lovely to be able to chat with all of you after seeing the presentations. I'm the Director of Communications and Engagement Strategy for Schmidt Ocean Institute, and I focus a lot on our broader communications of the work we do aboard our research vessel Falkor. My talk looked at building relationships with communities using different remote communications tools, and especially connecting with the world through these artist and student programs and being able to reach out to underrepresented groups within their own local communities.
Great. Thank you all. We welcome you. So we'll begin by asking some specific questions of each speaker and also some very general questions, and then also the audience questions that are coming up. So let's begin with a big question. There is a lack of, and of course, much concern for ethical and racial diversity in geochemistry and the geosciences as a whole. How is social media and Twitter in particular helping to amplify the issues and the voices of people of color in science and promote them in the academic arena? And I know, Jen, you've worked in this area. You've certainly highlighted a lot of women. So can you give us some strategies as how you think about it? And then after Jen, we'll open it up to the rest of the group. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's quite accessible actually for new Twitter users to start listening more to different voices just simply by following hashtags that are becoming quite popular right now. And there's a number of these focused on Black people in the sciences. So we've had Black in, sorry, it's late. I'm forgetting Black in Nature, Black Birding Week, Black in Astro. And so if you follow these hashtags on Twitter, you'll see a lot of the accounts that are doing a lot of the tweeting, and a lot of it can just be, you know, if you are a Black person in geochemistry, by all means, start tweeting if you feel comfortable and using those hashtags, and then other people will keep trying to amplify your voice and other voices, and that's really what's happening right now. And I think it's a really exciting movement, and I've been learning a lot and meeting a lot of new people. So it makes me quite hopeful, actually.
That's great. All of the rest of you use social media too. Would anyone else like to comment? Kim? Carly?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to add to that, especially from the ocean sciences perspective and what we do within Schmidt Ocean Institute, is the social platform has given a way to reach out to communities, not just to professionals who are already in the field, but to students and to people who wouldn't always come to the sciences naturally. And it's a way to show representation and to engage communities. Very few coastal nations have the ability to explore their deep ocean waters. And so being able to use social media to share what's there, to gauge interest at an early age, helps to expand our ability to not only encourage diversity within the sciences, but also to expand global connectivity. And so platforms like live streaming to Facebook or to YouTube really does allow us this window into an area that most others wouldn't get to see.
That's great. Thank you. Kim.
Yeah, I want to second all that was said, and it's such an exciting time, as Jen noted, to think about how we can purpose the tools that are at our fingertips. And so Jen spoke about how one can use an individual Twitter feed to listen, to learn, and amplify, which is most of what we're trying to do right now in response to this powerful movement as white scientists. But also, I think it's really important to note why people find themselves drawn to social media for another purpose, which is to build community more purposefully. And you can create an environment for yourself on Twitter, if you so choose, that is majority minority. And that's one of the reasons why I was drawn to Twitter in the first place, was because I was, as a woman in science, of course, a white woman in science, I'm surrounded by majority men most of the time. And so finding an environment like Twitter where I can cultivate a conversation and hear themes and work that people are doing to move diversity, equity, inclusion further, or that is not always happening in every faculty meeting I attend, let's say, was really deeply nourishing to me. And so now, of course, as a more evolved Twitter user, you can use it across all these different diversity of avenues. But I think that's a powerful attractor, and I wanted to really recognize that for the folks that are listening, wanting to find a way in, find a line of motivation for themselves to build a global network of very like-minded folks who care about more than what you might find in your average faculty meeting or graduate school application or job application. There are a lot of people who have an expansive view of science and expansive view of academia on Twitter.
That's great. Adina?
I just wanted to add that I think another aspect is that there is some anonymity in the social media. So it provides a forum for people that would otherwise feel uncomfortable voicing their opinion. It provides them with a broader community that can, retweet or check that they like this tweet and so on. And therefore, they're less reluctant to voice their concerns, opinions that otherwise they would maybe be hesitant because of backfiring and consequences of that. So that's one aspect. And the other aspect is it forces the rest of us who are maybe more passive listeners to get involved, because it gives us an opportunity to listen and to reflect and to think where we're standing and what our positions are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Nikki?
Yeah, again, I agree with things that have been said so far. I just wanted to add that from communication standpoint, some of the research and communication talks about this idea of there being a spiral of silence that can happen with people's attitudes sometimes, whereas individuals were walking around as social beings and we're trying to do our best to assess the state of public opinion and sort of use that as a shortcut to understand, what is everybody else thinking, and if I express something in this moment, am I going to be potentially ostracized by my community? It's described as this quasi-statistical sense that we all have of where public opinion lies. And prior to the introduction of the internet, you have a more limited set of mechanisms by which to assess the state of public opinion. And maybe your limited range of interactions with people or things that happen to be consistent with the kinds of things maybe that media would cover or the kinds of voices that traditional media outlets would amplify. But this spiral of silence idea is changing a bit with social media and Twitter, because now we have all of these different voices speaking that are making it seem, if before you thought I might be in the minority, so I'm not going to say anything and I'm just going to fall silent, you have more opportunities now to see that there are a lot of people out there who may actually be on the same page as you, even if they're not in your immediate geographic area, or even if they're not voices that maybe would be amplified in traditional outlets. There are other things that people make other arguments about, like filter bubbles and echo chambers, maybe creating some kinds of problems for the spiral of silence as well, but it can kind of cut both ways. And so I think this is an interesting opportunity with social media, things like Twitter.
Well, thank you. Well, we have an audience question. Thank you, Barbara. And this is kind of the flip side of using social media. So she asked a question of the entire group. So this is, her question is, even in an affluent city like mine, it was a surprise to the school board when the COVID forced a switch to online learning to discover that 20 to 25% of all households lacked either the connectivity or computers or the software for the children to participate, which, of course, we've seen around the globe. How do we address the equity challenges that hide in the otherwise noble aspirations and opportunities of online learning? So that's the flip side. So who'd like to take this one as a start? Okay, Kim.
I'll take a start, and I have to say I don't have a great answer, but it has been helpful to work at the front lines of climate change and to be purposeful about partnering with environmental justice organizations across Georgia, which is home to highly vulnerable populations, many of them who do not have this kind of access that you're referring to. And so they're facing these compound waves of challenges, especially this year, as they grapple with the racial violence and unrest and all the feelings that brings up in their communities and vulnerability and important roles to play at the same time, but also the COVID crisis and the pandemic and the pile-ons of lack of access to healthcare and educational instruments that most of us take for granted. And so, I've only been able to peer into the kind of partnerships that we're trying to build and understand what it would really mean to partner fully with these organizations, and recognize that many of the research projects that we're trying to do right now, are focused on bringing that kind of equipment into the partnership first, and really cementing IRBs, for example, around data stewardship and management that are community centered as well. So I'm not saying I have any answers, but I am making a call, I guess, to think about how academics as institution and science more generally can get involved in cementing these partnerships, not just going into a K through 12 school and then leaving after your lecture is done, but thinking about cementing long-term transdisciplinary research projects that are focused on translating the knowledge that we create into community impacts and transformative work. So that's a lot of words, but as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this, but we're just now beginning to understand the roles and responsibilities that we could play as an institution if we were mindful in this space.
Thank you. Adina.
So I think what the statistics means is that we have to do something about it. And there's a lot, this disparity in haves and have-nots is really impacting all of us, impacting inclusion, diversity, and everything else. I think as universities, we have to reach out to our alumni and donors and partners and make sure that every child has access to social media or to computers if we're going to offer all of our classes online from now on. And, I know that in my university, we have a program where part of GeoPath's program that I'm running, we wrote NSF and did a change in the budget to buy little iPads for the students so they can connect with iPads. They're not that expensive and they can work with that. And in parallel, we have to change the way we teach. We have to think about the fact that maybe somebody is using something like that, another laptop, and they have to listen to a lecture on a 3 by 5 inch device, and they can't really open an Excel spreadsheet. So we have to make changes in our curricula and in our expectations to fit everybody, and not assume that everybody has fancy software and the 2 screens on their desktop and so on.
Well, I'll ask, do you think this is something the state and federal government should be involved in? And should we be lobbying for these kinds of changes? So there was a comment brought up earlier about how to get the choir involved. I think, Kim, you brought that up in an earlier session today. So we have this choir of people. Is this something we should be taking on to make sure everyone has that access to education and online learning?
I'm just throwing out there another thing along those lines is we still have this big issue with for-profit publishers, right? Who just, all the money that our students pay for textbooks, even if they're online, continuing to put pressure on them, and they've seemed to have escaped everything fairly unscathed, amazingly, these publishers. So, they owe science and society so much, given that they have really just been profiting off of all of our labors 3 times over, as we all know. Those publishers alone could probably equip most of the youth of our country with nice iPads or something. Just to say, that's another place in addition to the federal government we could be putting some pressure.
Well, I mean, federal government is really important. In many countries throughout the world, education is free or at least affordable. And we are one of the only Western civilizations where it's impossible for a normal person to get really good education because they can't afford it. It's not a political campaign here, but I do think one of the highest priorities for this country is free education or affordable education. And if there's students listening to this webinar or this conversation, the one thing that you can do to foster change is actually get yourselves out there and vote.
It's true. Okay, well, let's circle back to then. Oh, okay. Okay, we can circle back to many of you use for education, many of you use different techniques, social media techniques to enhance education, from streaming to Twitter to wiki pages. So do you use different types of social media to communicate with different target audiences? And if so, what is your strategy and how do you decide which to use when? Some of us don't even know the difference between, Instagram and Twitter. So I'd like to start with Carly.
Yeah, thank you. I think really taking some time to understand the platforms and the audiences you're wanting to reach is very important, because if you're trying to get a message across in an inappropriate platform, it's going to fall flat. And so really getting familiar with the social platforms that are out there. What LinkedIn does is different from TikTok, is different from Twitter, Instagram, or whatever it is, and who you're trying to reach. So I think the first thing that a lot of people forget to do is to identify that audience and how they want to connect with them. And then second is going through and familiarizing yourself with the different platforms and how they work. For example, Instagram is really a visual platform. And so we're very fortunate enough at Schmidt Ocean Institute to get some incredible imagery from the seafloor that we're able to share and engage with audiences using that visual imagery. And so we make Instagram one of our priorities, because we can create highlight videos or short clips of these intriguing natural phenomena or animals that we can use to engage groups with, and then draw them into some of our other work that maybe takes a deeper dive into some of the topics that we're presenting, whether it's a longer video or a blog or even an interactive chat. And the second piece to that is I think also making sure that it's two-way communication and that it's interactive, even though it's on social media, you're not just spewing things out, but that you're really creating a platform for engagement and conversation.
And Kim, you work a lot with a wide variety of policymakers and folks. So what would you like to add?
Yeah, so as we talked about earlier, I think the way that people leverage these different platforms, as Carly said, is quite specific to their purpose and whether they are what they're interested in, what their core goals are. For me, I kind of have pretty tight walls between the Twitter presence that I maintain is very internationally facing, very media facing, very kind of policy facing. And then my Facebook audience is generally more local to state level, maybe regional level kind of content that I'm pushing. It deeper dives. I'm definitely a lot more provocative on my Facebook account for that reason, and a lot more kind of politically pointed in many ways as well to try to engender some specific advocacy work perhaps that we might be able to move on at various levels. And then my Instagram is really kind of a mishmash of maybe more highly personal things, as well as some engagement with a more tight in crowd. And obviously some of that is very student facing as well, as was mentioned before, a very good platform for engaging students. So, you know, for me, you know, I found the policy Twitter media space to be extremely effective way to get your message across and to build a community and around those shared goals. For me, it's about climate movement, climate action, climate advocacy, climate solutions. And so that's been really fun to build that and see that grow. But obviously different people use Twitter for very different reasons. And I think it's important to note it's incredibly versatile. And the longer you are on there, you hone a set of skills that you never lose. It's like riding a bike. You just get better. And it takes a while to get in the groove of that, but you can find, you know, maybe 10 to 15, a whole rainbow of purposes all of a sudden while you're on Twitter, and all of a sudden you have a whole rainbow of goals, and it changes day to day. Now my feed is all about Black Lives Matter and really being part of that conversation. And I've shelved most of the other things. And so it's also very dynamic. It's a very dynamic space as well for those of us who've been on for a long time.
Thank you. Nikki.
I just wanted to add, I think maybe people have touched on this a little bit already, but there's, in addition to the reality that certain platforms attract different kinds of audiences, like I think in the Twitter space, for example, you have a lot of journalists hanging out there, a lot of policymakers, maybe more so than on Facebook. So the strategies Kim is describing make a lot of sense. I just wanted to add too that the platforms differ in the kinds of engagement that they make easy or not, just by the nature of their design and the, you know, the technical affordances that they allow. And so you can think of even just depending on what kind of activity or two-way conversation, as we're saying, which is ideal, not just like setting something and forgetting it, but if you're going to do this, just know that, you know, Facebook recently added a care emoji, and even just something that subtle can make a difference in the kind of engagement that you might be able to have and that people can easily participate in versus another platform that maybe doesn't offer the same kinds of forms of expression, or if it does, it doesn't make them easy, or it's not built in specifically to the platform. I mean, Facebook doesn't have a dislike button for a reason, but something like Reddit does have upvoting and downvoting. And these things can make a difference for the trajectory that whatever you are communicating about can go. So something to keep in mind as well. It's kind of beyond your control, but you can think about it ahead of time. Oh, and I will add, underlying this, sometimes there are ongoing changes to the algorithms that maybe are worth checking on before communicating. Like in the wake of a lot of criticism about the amplification of misinformation on Facebook, Facebook decided to highlight more prominently in individuals' news feeds things like posts from friends and family and not from official organizations. Which is an interesting choice and could be criticized, but the point is, like, if you don't know that, maybe you thought your communication would reach more people than it would. So just keep up on what the technology is actually capable of doing and allows users to do.
Thank you. Good advice. Anyone else, Adina?
Sure, and I would actually want to ask Jen to follow up after I say what I say, because she has a wonderful example of using Wikipedia as part of a tool to communicate and to engage students in communication. But I use the media mostly for teaching. I follow the media in other venues, but I use it myself for teaching. So the platforms I use are usually blogs, which I insist students write little blogs and share the blogs. And I write blogs myself, and web pages that are project specific or topic specific. So each one of the grants or the research projects that I have has a dedicated web page, and I put resources there, and I put all sorts of materials that are relevant to the science and to the communication of this science. I work with students on story maps, where it's a platform where they can add content on a GIS platform and share their research. So these are somewhat more traditional and focused types of using the media, but I think they're powerful, particularly for teaching, and they reach specific audiences.
Do you have them closed? Oh, sorry. Are they closed? Are they behind your, sort of content page, or are they open blog?
No, my personal work web page and all of my class materials and all of my project materials are all open to anybody who wants to plagiarize. Which
Wonderful.
Actually, I put them out there because I think anybody wants to use anything, feel free. They're there to share. We don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Thank you. We can check them out. Well, now I'll pass it over to Tom for the next series of questions.
Thanks very much, Barb. I hope everyone can see me. My internet connection isn't very good tonight, so I apologize for that. I'd actually like to ask Jen a question, and this is building on what Adina has just been saying about having really different types of social media accounts for different themes. So some people only have a single social media account. Followers maybe know what to expect and where to go for specific topics. Do you think this is a good idea, for you, for what you do? What's your approach? How do you think single topics compared to the power of a wide-ranging topic tweets?
Yeah, I think that this is really up to how much energy and time someone wants to devote to it. So, some people, it's just up to the individual. Some people really enjoy having multiple accounts or different kind of personalities, or, playing around with, or maybe having a lab account and maybe having their students tweet from it. Could be fun too. I've just found that I've tried to make other ones and I can't seem to handle more than one, so to speak. More than one handle. So that's literally why I just have one, is I just can't keep up with more than that. But some people are really good about kind of separating it out into different themes. So more power to you if you can do that. And if I could just, well, I can come back to the Wikipedia thing later, maybe. Yeah.
Go ahead, do it. I asked you.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can give a good shout out for Wiki Education. I love those folks at Wiki Education. If anybody's thinking of teaching a class and wanting to really put more of the work online, I highly recommend you just Google Wiki Education. It's basically just a portal to basically how to use Wikipedia editing in the classroom. It'll walk you through it. It is a lot of work. If you go to my website, I have some little tutorials and things about how to implement it. Just know it's a lot of work, but it is it'll pay back in a big way, and I think the students get a lot of value out of it and are really empowered by it and have a lot of fun with it. And so far, it's all been positive experiences, 99% positive experiences. If you start editing stubs. Don't try to go edit the climate change page, but they walk you through all that on Wiki Education. So that was my little plug for that. Yeah.
And in that respect, I looked at our Discord communication and I saw that some people were saying that they actually put in Wikipedia pages, for example, for Black women scientists and so on, which increase, we talked before about diversity and
Good. I hope they stay up. We'll keep adding to them to raise the notability. That's fantastic to hear.
There's another thing that's just actually sprung to mind just as you've been talking about it. I often work in biomedicine. Social media, of course, means different things to different people. You know, even WhatsApp is social media. And people have set up lots of WhatsApp groups to communicate their research. Do any of you have any experience in actually using social media primarily as a research communication tool within groups? And how does that work?
Actually, I can talk about this. This just brings to mind actually Slack, which I guess could be considered kind of similar to WhatsApp, but with maybe, I don't know, I don't use WhatsApp as much, but I will say Slack has been amazing for the COVID-19, you said biomedicine researchers. So I've actually been involved with a group of biochemists who are actually making our own test kits at Georgia Tech. And anyway, through that collaboration, I've been reading a lot and trying to learn from this community out there of basically biochemistry and molecular biology researchers. And there's a Slack for that, and it's amazing. And everybody is just super open access and communicative. So I think Slack has a long ways to go. You can meet people through it, but it's like maybe a little more private than just putting everything out there publicly like Twitter. So I'd say, yeah, I guess that's Slack is my perspective, but I'm sure there's others out there too.
Yeah, I would say that one of the great benefits of social media in a research world or research in a social media world is finding people across the world who may be very interested in your research, or one of the best things I've been able to do is identify folks who are going out to some of my research sites and say, hey, you know, could you collect a bottle of water? Or pick up that, you know, box for me, and just tangible, simple stuff like that becomes a lot easier. But really, the Jen Glass and I have a recent example from our efforts to compile a group of folks who were interested in removing the GRE as a requirement for graduate admissions. And we trumpeted out on Twitter that EAS our department had just made the decision to remove that requirement from our applications. And all of a sudden, you know, there's all these people out there who said, yeah, we're working on that, we're trying, I'm compiling a list. And all of a sudden we're banding together and we're writing an article for EOS that was just published, by the way, check it out. So that's just, I think, a very recent example of how collaborations can nucleate and gel very quickly for high productive work in ways that never would have otherwise been possible.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Just to get back to what Jen was saying, I'd never heard of Slack. So that's another. I've just been writing it down. Carly, do you have any thoughts on this?
I do. We actually have a great example. We had a 150-foot siphonophore found earlier this spring in April, which we believe may be the or close to the longest species in the world. And so one of the things that's really interesting is we, put that out to the press and it got picked up, it went viral, and it created an amazing conversation on Twitter, and actually brought together a lot of different scientists that were involved in the expedition that wanted to comment and weigh in. And then just a month ago, we had a very similar thing happen with what we called the benthic tornado, where we saw this like interesting physical ocean phenomena happen with our ROV in the water, and we weren't sure if it was caused by the ROV, if we had stumbled upon something new, and it created a really interesting conversation through social media, bringing experts from all over the world together and bringing their perspective to weigh in and come up with a solution drawing lots of people in to speak on the topic. So I think actually social media and these different platforms do provide a really great opportunity, not only for engagement, but for other people in the sciences who wouldn't normally interact to be able to come together.
Yeah, I had my mic muted. What's ROV, Carly?
That would be very helpful to explain. An underwater robot. So it stands for remotely operated vehicle. We have one that goes down to 4,500 meters, and it takes beautiful 4K video and samples of the deep sea floor.
Thanks. Nikki, do you have any thoughts on this?
I don't think I have any that haven't already been said. I guess echoing some of the things about research connections that wouldn't have been made in previous eras, I guess before the internet. I'm failing to, took a wonderful class called Science and Social Media taught by Dominique Broussard. Anybody wants to look up some of her work, but I'm failing to remember specific examples. Yeah, I can't. She discusses this a lot and really showcases how effectively these connections can be made in places like Twitter.
There's also examples of people doing really creative things like coming up with historical accounts of people. Has anybody seen that, of like a figure in history of science? Like I think somebody did it with is it John Tyndall was one of the ones that was early work on greenhouse gases. I think he has an account. So it's interesting, and then just tweeting the world from this historical figure's perspective. I just think I love those kind of things, of people being really creative with it.
Excellent. Can I just go back to Nikki? Nikki, one of the things you were talking about earlier was misinformation, which let's call it fake news. Let's call a spade a spade. So fake news. How do you think we should deal with it?
It's a good question. I think I said this in the context of a different question earlier, but I'll say it again. At some level, it depends what the fake news is about. And I mentioned that for different areas of science, people can be sort of, anti-science is a strong word, but they're opposed, or they have beliefs that are inconsistent with the best available evidence on a subject. But then you'll find that in other areas of science, they are perfectly well informed and willing to accept what the scientific community agrees upon. So on some level, it can depend on the specific area of science and the kind of resistance that the fake news might be triggering in someone. So my talk was a lot about psychological tendency to sort of assimilate information based on pre-existing tendencies and just our existing worldviews, kind of privileging the parts of a communication that are telling us what we want to hear and ignoring parts that don't. So if a given piece of fake news is probably resonating with an audience on some specific value that they already hold and want to continue holding. So combating that fake news in a way that just says that value system is wrong is going to be ineffective. There was a really good example that came out earlier this year that was about communication, actually corrective information, attempting to correct misinformation about the Zika virus. This is actually before COVID kind of expanded, obviously, in significance around the world. But so this was published about Zika specifically, but just showing that attempts to correct information about Zika with that kind of a strategy of just saying, here's what you believe, and this is the facts that refute what you believe, actually just caused some of the people in this experimental study to dig in further. They actually believed their misbeliefs even stronger. And not only that, but it actually seemed to spread to extend where their inaccuracy of some of their other beliefs also escalated as well, which is disturbing. It's like somehow this spreading effect of making them more resistant to all aspects of what they might be misinformed about. So I guess if you're asking for practical advice, I would say to try to understand what it is about the specific piece of fake news that is resonating with someone, and then find a way to communicate that doesn't specifically mock or totally disregard that aspect of this person's value system that is apparently so dearly held, and instead kind of legitimize it, recognize it as a barrier to their believing what you would want them to believe, and then that'll help gain some credibility for you as a communicator. Sort of a long answer, but hopefully
No,
helpful.
it's a very good answer, actually, because I think it comes back to a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, is that you actually do have to recognize that the other person has a point of view and not just talk down to them. I actually want to move on a little bit, maybe go to Kim, because Kim, you've actually had some contact with Congress. You've been talking to Congress about climate change. How do you go about this? Because obviously people have very, very fixed views which very largely depend on which side of the political spectrum they come from. How do you approach dealing with this sort of issue?
Well, I think one thing that I love to stress, and I think this falls on what Nikki was saying, is that really communicating is about a relationship. And whether it's a fleeting one or whether it's sustained one, in large part will in part determine your success as well. And so with respect to engaging with Congress, I wasn't the first time that I ever spoke to Congress when I was called to testify last year about climate change. In fact, I had been expressing my interest and desire and my respect for their views, and my presence was known for a decade before last year. So I had been going to DC on my own dime, on my own time, often with students, which are amazingly enabling at fostering wonderful conversation with congressional staffers and members alike, by the way. It's a good tip. So bring a student when you can, but they can't be there at a congressional testimony. But it's that sustained and respectful engagement that really provides the platform for impact across the aisle. And so that's not easy in our highly politicized and partisan world. And if you toe that line too strongly, or you take that too literally, sometimes you find yourself on the wrong issue of on the wrong side of your own value system, which is where you may have strayed and you need to recalibrate. But this is a dynamic space, and it's one that you kind of always adjusting to the winds here. And so preparing for a congressional testimony is really just taking all those experiences and knowing that they're Googling you and knowing that they're doing their research on you, and hopefully they're finding somebody who is engaging purposefully, respectfully, in a sustained way and wants to continue the conversation. And so actually my whole testimony was basically, please, let's keep talking, more or less. We have a problem, let's keep talking, was the core message of my testimony. So when you are constructive in that way, I think hopefully you'll get far, but this is a long game, there's no doubt about it. Keeping that in mind is important.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that, Adina?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, Kim has devoted a lot of her time and energy to do that, and she has a lot of practice. But there's a lot that everybody can do without having been invited to come and give testimony. You can write to your representative. You can, sign petitions. You can go at the local scale. You don't have to go to DC. Each one of us has people in their own county and in their own state that they can communicate with, and talking to staffers. They have more time and they're more open, and through the staffers you get to the representatives a lot of times. In fact, I find that the staffers sometimes are more open and more educated and informed.
I just want to add quickly to layer up on what Adina said, that it's not just these more very formal channels, but there are opportunities to get involved with policy in this space of your own research at your institution, at your city, state, and even at the federal level. Of course, AGU has its own science policy fellowships. Each federal agency has their own science policy fellowships as well. So keep those opportunities in mind, and then oftentimes they can be an interesting add-on to a career that otherwise might look, very, very traditional. So it's no longer either or. You don't have to, think about one of these opportunities derailing your dreams to be a scientist. You can add on and choose your own adventure through this space in ways that we couldn't when I was coming up. That was not possible. So I think that that's very important and very widely valued right now. So if you're listening, interested in that space, gaining some concrete skills and building that network first purposefully when you're young is great. And there are a lot of good opportunities out there.
Yeah,
Thanks.
there's congressional fellows of the AAAS for all levels, from master students, undergrads, grad students, and senior scientists.
One thing that I'd like to just ask everybody, just to build on this, is something that Adina actually mentioned earlier when we were talking in the previous session, and that is how we probably now need to develop lots of different new skills, new media skills, new communication skills. And I'd just like to go around speak to each one of you and see what you think would be important for us to learn. Carly, do you want to kick that off?
Where to start? There are so many different skills. I think it depends what stage, level, and interest you have. So as a general place, I think starting in one of the science communications trainings is a great place to really get your footing. There's so many. There's the Alan Aldo group. There's Compass. There's so many different people now offering that type of work if you're kind of just diving in for the first time. And then I think it's really important to look at the areas you're working in and what's being used. So Twitter has been mentioned today as a great tool, but take a look and take some time to review accounts of people you value and trust, and just start to follow them before you start to post and see the formats, how people are doing that. You know, even things as simple as hashtags, you know, using hashtags to be able to use theming in your messaging and that sort of thing. It's a little nuanced, so it takes some time, but it's very valuable once you are able to get your foot in the door.
Thanks. Jen, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think just an example, I guess, is going back to Wikipedia, and I've learned that there's kind of different levels of editors on Wikipedia and different kind of ranks of, I guess, expertise, or how expert of a Wikipedia editor you are. And a lot of that breaks down to kind of justifying different things about how you've written the article in order to, I guess, gain some respect from fellow editors and things. And there's a lot of rules on Wikipedia, which I didn't know going into it, that there were so many rules. And that's good in some sense, because it really, I think it actually is a great service to the world to have this online encyclopedia. So I think that's a lot of time to basically read all those pages of rules and policies and kind of adapt and learn those is just one thing that I've recently found out about.
Yeah, I must admit it's been a big learning process for me. I was talking to Barb earlier about how we thought we were going to actually be presenting this session in Hawaii. And of course, suddenly we're having to actually learn all these new skills as we go along. And until we had the first session, the first question and answer session earlier, I think certainly I was very nervous about what's going to happen. And the second one has just been much calmer. You know, I've learned a skill and I'm really pleased with it. Nikki, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was thinking, I have sort of an abstract answer, I guess, but I was just reflecting on Kim's comment about at a certain point you can maybe deny your own value system or something if you're trying to communicate in a way that resonates with another, and I think is a really important point. And so I was reflecting on this very difficult skill that I think we're all in the process of having to develop. The more and more polarized society becomes in ways, and the more controversial certain issues that we all hold dear might become. It's just thinking about this this skill of recognizing when you're in a conversation with somebody who seems to have a different version of reality than you do, where you try to the best you can, think of the most charitable version of their perspective and argue against that. And you'll probably have the best chance of seeming, you know, the most agreeable in your communication without necessarily deviating from something you value, but giving the person the most benefit of the doubt, whether you maybe think they deserve it is a separate question. But I think that is a very difficult skill, in addition to recognizing, which I think we said in the previous session, just that some communications maybe are meant to persuade and some are meant to inform. And before you spend all of this energy and potentially risk compromising something that way you see yourself or something you believe to try to get someone to agree with you, do you think they're even persuadable? Is this a reasonable goal to even have, or would your energy be better spent elsewhere? I think it's a useful question.
That's interesting. I work with lots of doctors, and from discipline to discipline, their degree of persuadability just changes. Surgeons, heart specialists are they know everything, so it's very, very difficult to persuade them. Adina, do you have anything to add?
I'll try to keep short. So I think what I have to add is that there are opportunities out there and we need to make them available. So we need to offer communication workshops everywhere we can, within our department, within our university, within our community, societies, meetings, and encourage everybody to participate in them. And I know Tom and I do that at Goldschmidt, and they're being offered at AGU. I myself went to one of these that was specific about using social media, and that's where I learned a little bit about Twitter and other social forums, which Jen was leading in one of these meetings. And then 2 years ago, I actually had Kim open a Twitter account for me because I needed to do that. And I wasn't sure I'm doing the right thing. So I went and asked for help. So it's never too late. We can all benefit from improving what we're doing and doing it better. And one thing that is really important is because everybody has access to these apps and webs and everything from really young age, we have to train students to realize how to evaluate content from kindergarten.
Yes.
As soon as they get the thing in their hand, they need to know what to look, what not to look, and how to evaluate content. And that's something we're really missing.
Yeah, I think schools should teach that. I think that should be just one of the fundamental things that is taught in school. Okay, we're coming to the end of our hour. Very, very quickly, can we go around all the panelists and just say, what's your take-home message? Kim.
So I don't really have a take-home message, but I have a comment that I'd like to say about the last thing. So I'll make that my take-home. I was going to say that I like Adina, just jump in. The water's great, and there are a lot of reasons to jump in the pool and start swimming, no matter where you are in your stage. And the most important thing I would like to stress is that you don't have to even know why you really want to do it yet. People say, like, identify your audience, identify your goals, develop a strategic plan, all to budget for your time. You can just start to play and explore. And all of those, scaffold of science communication that you learn in all of those lovely programs, sometimes those need to be just thrown out the window to free yourself to explore these spaces. And I think that's the most important thing to say. When I sent out my first tweet, I thought it was going to be a tidal wave torrent of vitriol back at me. And guess what? Nobody cared. It landed like, a tree fell in a forest and nobody was even there. So, lower the barrier for yourself, jump on in, get started. It takes time, but it's really rewarding.
Great advice. Carly.
Sorry, I'm chasing the sun around my desk right now. I think that's great, Kim, really good advice, and I would second that. I'd also say that there are so many people out there, and there's so many different platforms that can be overwhelming, but finding your niche or finding that area that really speaks to you and that feels comfortable for you is the best place to start, and trying to reach with new groups, not just your inner circle, so that you can share and broaden awareness about some of the issues that you work with.
Thanks, Carly. Jen, do you want to add something? Just how would you summarize it?
Is that me or Kim? Sorry.
It's you, Jen.
Okay.
Okay, talking to Jennifer Glass.
Okay, excellent. Sorry. Yeah, I would echo what everyone else said about finding new voices and meeting new people. There's such an amazing group of students on Twitter, and I've learned so much from them. And they're really the majority of who I follow now and whose voices I try to amplify. And I love just they each have their own, their people, so but I love how their personalities come through in the accounts, and it can be a really joyous community building experience. That's what I found it to be. So I feel very lucky to have kind of stumbled into it and to have met so many amazing people. And I encourage everybody to look at our database of databases of diverse speakers that we've compiled at Georgia Tech. So if you look at the pinned message on my Methanogen Twitter account, you'll see that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really impressed at how positive everyone is about using social media. I think this is a really good message. Nikki, how would you summarize it?
I think earlier I said something just about the fact that there's a lot of empirical work that's done about the kinds of things that work or that maybe are more or less effective in communicating science. And so those resources are out there if you're interested in looking for them. But also, even if you're not, and you do just, as Kim mentioned, want to jump in, the nice thing I think is that people who study communication and science communication are also really excited to communicate about it. So like if you join some of these spaces, will have a lot of enthusiastic support from people who are just glad that people care and that they're trying. So don't hesitate to join that conversation because you'll have a lot of friendly voices helping you out.
Don't hesitate. That's great advice. Adina.
Since we're short on time, I think I'll say something that I think is really important is communicating should start with listening. So take the time to listen to who you're communicating with and foster bridges and empower others before you fill your guts.
Great advice. Great advice. Thank you. Now listen, I'm going to hand over to Barb. So I'm going to switch off my webcam. Thank you very much, everybody. Barb?
And thank you, Tom, for staying awake at 3 a.m.
I know we owe Tom a huge applause for getting up at 3 and staying up till 4. So for a continuation of this great discussion, there's still the Discord server that will be on, and of course for the next 30 days. And there's also questions that you can add to the 15E question box. So we sincerely thank all of our panelists. Some of you were up also very late. It's been fabulous for the discussion. This will be recorded and online. We thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you all online. So have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.